Thank you for joining us and welcome to the press conference following the VTC of the EU27 leaders on COVID coordination. I'm glad you have all tuned in massively. Please note that we have translation in many languages: German, French, Spanish, Italian, English and Dutch as well. We'll take questions, but first let's go to the President of the European Council.
Bonsoir à chacune et à chacun. Le thème principal de notre réunion ce soir par vidéoconférence était bien entendu la poursuite du travail de coopération et de coordination en lien avec la Covid-19. Cependant, avant d'aborder ce sujet-là, je souhaiterais dire un mot au sujet de Alexei Navalny. About Alexei Navalny, we condemn his detention by the Russian authorities. Mr. Navalny's rights must be fully and unconditionally respected. We call on Russia to release him immediately and ensure his safety. We expect Russia to urgently proceed with the independent and transparent investigation into the attack on his life and to fully cooperate with the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to ensure an impartial international investigation. Je veux maintenant en venir à la question du Covid-19. La réunion que nous avons eue ce soir a été l'occasion de cadrer l'action qui est indispensable à court terme et à moyen terme. Et l'action va se déployer autour de deux sujets principaux. Le premier point porte sur les mutations du virus auxquelles nous faisons face, la mutation britannique et d'autres mutations. Et cela a été l'occasion de cette réunion pour l'ensemble des 27 leaders de montrer à quel point nous sommes conscients quant au sérieux de la situation et au caractère indispensable des mesures restrictives qui doivent être maintenues, voire même dans certains cas peut-être adaptées ou renforcées. En lien avec cela, nous avons évidemment marqué notre satisfaction quant au fait que l'on a pu faire un pas en avant extrêmement important en lien avec la reconnaissance des tests rapides antigènes, décision qui a été prise cet après-midi. Mais nous avons également considéré que l'on devait être très engagé pour faire en sorte que le sequencing et les échanges d'informations soient renforcés afin d'avoir la pleine capacité de mesurer parfaitement l'évolution de ces nouveaux variants et de ces mutations. Nous avons aussi abordé la question des frontières, les frontières intérieures et les frontières extérieures. Nous sommes totalement convaincus que nous devons maintenir des frontières ouvertes pour garantir le bon fonctionnement du marché intérieur. Dans le même temps, nous sommes aussi convaincus que s'agissant des déplacements non essentiels, des restrictions doivent pouvoir être envisagées et c'est en cela qu'il peut aussi être envisagé d'adapter les recommandations qui sont liées à ce sujet. Nous allons continuer à être très mobilisés pour travailler pour la coopération, la coordination entre les États membres sur le sujet. Et enfin, au-delà de ce premier point, la question des mutations du virus, la nécessité d'être extrêmement vigilant, extrêmement engagé pour tenter de contenir autant que possible le virus et spécialement les nouvelles formes variantes de ce virus. Il y a un deuxième point qui est évidemment essentiel, c'est la vaccination. Et le premier point que nous voulons mettre en évidence, beaucoup l'ont dit, c'est que s'il a été possible, en quelques mois à peine, au départ d'une pandémie dont on a mesuré toute l'importance et tout le sérieux en début d'année 2020, en moins d'un an, de réussir à développer des vaccins et à commencer à les distribuer, c'est parce qu'il y a eu un engagement très fort dans l'unité européenne, une mobilisation de financement qui ont donné lieu à cette capacité, dès la fin de l'année passée, pour l'Agence européenne des médicaments, de reconnaître un premier vaccin, maintenant un deuxième. Et vous savez que la Commission a sécurisé de très nombreuses doses au travers de 6 contrats qui ont été conclus. About vaccination, first point, leaders want vaccination to be accelerated. And in this respect, commitments on deliveries made by companies must be respected. Leaders reaffirmed that vaccines should be distributed at the same time and must be on pro rata population basis. And we reaffirmed the need to have a close follow-up of the vaccination process. All possible means will be examined to ensure rapid supply, including early distribution to avoid delays. We discussed also the question of vaccine certificates, and we think that we should be able to agree on common elements to include in the certificates for medical purposes. And at a later stage, we can see if and in which circumstances these certificates can be used. S'agissant de ces certificats de vaccins, je veux donc être extrêmement clair sur le sujet. Nous sommes prudents sur le thème. Nous pensons qu'il est important de constater effectivement lorsque des personnes ont été vaccinées et d'harmoniser nos procédures, y compris en lien avec les organisations internationales et les instruments qui existent déjà sur le plan international sur ce sujet-là. Mais nous mesurons bien toutes les raisons pour lesquelles il n'est pas réaliste dès à présent d'apprécier des conséquences que l'on donne à ce certificat. Et enfin, un dernier point qui nous tient à cœur et pour lequel nous voulons être très mobilisés, et la Réunion a été un signal très fort dans cette direction-là, c'est la solidarité européenne pour les partenaires à l'extérieur de l'Union européenne, la solidarité internationale de l'Union européenne. Parce que nous considérons que le vaccin devrait être un bien commun, nous l'avons dit à plusieurs reprises, parce que nous considérons que cette initiative COVAX, pour laquelle nous avons été très mobilisés et nous le restons, est absolument importante, mais aussi parce que nous mesurons bien que pour vaincre cette pandémie, nous devons la vaincre pas seulement en Europe, nous devons la vaincre dans le monde entier, et c'est le sens d'un engagement très fort qui a été répété par les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, avec un rôle clé qui est joué et assumé et que je veux saluer par la Commission européenne dans cet esprit d'équipe européen afin de mobiliser nos ressources pour pouvoir aussi progresser sur ce sujet-là. Voilà les quelques éléments d'orientation que je voulais partager avec vous ce soir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam President, you have the floor.
Thank you. Indeed, across Europe, the health situation remains very serious. And yes, there is reason for hope because of the vaccines, but there's also strong reason for concern with the new variants we are observing. We must therefore remain focused and we must remain determined in our response. We must ensure delivery of vaccines from the companies and we must ensure the quick and efficient use of the available vaccines. I am glad that we agreed with Member States to administer as many doses as possible over the next weeks and months. Of course, to support this, we are working hand in hand with EMA and the companies. We are determined to provide more predictability and stability to the delivery process, and we look forward to more vaccines and more doses coming on stream soon. At the same time, we are increasingly concerned about different variants of the virus. Thus, we need much better knowledge of the real presence and the real spread of these variants of the virus and in all the different places in the European Union. And that is why we need more testing and more sequencing after positive testing throughout the entire European Union. Today, the situation is as such that almost all member states are sequencing less than 1% of the positive tests. We have only 2 member states that are testing around 10%, and that is necessary. So this is far too little, and therefore we need to increase the sequencing to at least 5% of all positive tests. The Commission will support this effort thanks to ECDC capacities in this field and targeted funding. A word to the border situation. Indeed, in order to keep our external and internal borders open, we need targeted measures that keep us all safe. We have an increase in infections across Europe, and at the same time, the just mentioned new variants are spreading in Europe. And to identify such high-risk areas, we think, to refine our mapping. So we propose that the newly introduced category of dark red, a dark red zone, would show that in this zone the virus is circulating at a very high level. Persons travelling from dark red areas could be required to do a test before departure, as well as to undergo quarantine after arrival. This is within the European Union. And in view of the very serious health situation, all non-essential travel should be strongly discouraged. both within the country and, of course, across borders. At the same time, it is absolutely important to keep the single market functioning. So, concerning essential workers and goods, they must continue to cross borders smoothly. This is of utmost importance. With regard to the external borders, we will also propose to have additional safety measures. For those travelling from third countries on essential travel to Europe, we would, for example, require testing before departure. Finally, we had some discussions around the certificates to be issued to people who have received the vaccines. I believe we have to differentiate two different issues. The first one is plain and simply the documentation itself. A documentation of vaccination is a medical necessity. And there is a global standard for this. You all know it. It is the WHO's Yellow International Certification. The second question is, what can you use this certificate for? The use to be made of this certificate must be very carefully considered. There are a few yet unknown variables to take into account. For example, the medical question: does vaccination inhibit transmission of the virus by the vaccinated person? We have no answer on that. And how long is the vaccination effective? We do not know that for certain neither. And then the political question: how do you ensure that you respect the rights of those who have not had access to a vaccine? And what other alternatives do you offer to those who have legitimate reasons for not getting the vaccine? And at the same time, how do we protect the personal data of citizens? So, open questions here. Therefore, later on, when the time is ripe, we will need a thorough debate and a consensus among member states on possible other uses of the certificate. Last but not least, we have discussed Europe, but we do not forget the rest of the world. The pandemic is global. In a couple of months in Europe, we will have more doses than we can use. With BioNTech and Moderna authorized, we can vaccinate up to 85% of the EU population. These are 380 million people. At the same time, other parts of the world, the poorer ones, see themselves as left behind in the access of COVID-19 vaccines. From the start, we have invested in COVAX, the Global Vaccine Procurement Facility. COVAX remains the best route for universal vaccine solidarity, but as there is a global rush to vaccines, there is thus a shortage. I have suggested an EU mechanism to share access to some of our vaccines until COVAX is able to deliver poor countries with large quantities of vaccines. Vaccines that we agree to share as part of Team Europe could be channeled through COVAX. We can and we should do this without disrupting ongoing national vaccination plans and in coordination with the companies. This is also a question of self-interest. The longer and the more the virus circulates in the world, the more risk of mutations and the more risks to our own health we have. Therefore, it is also in our self-interest to share early enough vaccines with other regions of the world.
Thank you, Madam President. We'll take a few questions now, and I'll start with Nikos Chrysolaris from Bloomberg. Nikos, please turn on your camera.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Mr. President, you said that, and Madam President, you both said that lockdown measures and restrictive measures must continue and be strengthened. Do you have a time frame for how long? Given also the fact that, as far as I can hear, you didn't commit, at least explicitly, to the Commission's proposal to vaccinate 70% of the population by summer. And my second question, you said that all business and leisure travel, non-essential travel, should be discouraged, strongly discouraged. how this discouragement will be enforced.
Yeah, first of all, there is a global and clear support for this proposal of the Commission. This is an ambitious goal. This is an ambitious goal. Of course, 70% of our people in Europe vaccinated by the summer. But at the same time, it's very important to accelerate the vaccination. And we discussed a lot what are the different tools we have. And the European Commission clarified, shared with all the leaders very important information in order to demonstrate that even if we face obstacles, we are trying to work very hard in order to overcome those obstacles and in order to find concrete solutions. This is my first point. My second point, of course, the vaccination is the beginning of something which is more positive and there is more hope. But at the same time, we have understood, especially the last weeks, that we face new variants, especially, but not only, the British variants of the COVID-19. It means that we need to remain very vigilant, that probably we need to confirm, to maintain, or to add sometimes very strong measures in order to limit the spread of the virus. And that's why, also because we try to learn the lessons of the past, we have clearly said that we want to maintain the functioning of the single market, but at the same time, for the not essential travels, we accept that probably we need to decide some restrictive measures in a European approach, based on a European cooperation, a European coordination. And until when it will be necessary to keep those very important and difficult measures, the common goal is to limit the spread of the virus, and we will assess the situation, taking into consideration the positive effects of the measures that we need to take.
Yes, I can only underline what Charles Michel just said. So Europe is more or less one epidemiological zone at the moment, being with a relatively high level of the spread of the virus and completely disseminated. And as it is absolutely crucial to keep internally the single market going and, for example, to have a seamless procedure for cross-border workers, health workers, for example, who live on one side of a former border and work on the other side of this former border, so to keep the borders in general open. For that, it is necessary that we have a common understanding and a common agreement how to deal with the different zones, a light red zone or a dark red zone, and to have targeted measures. One of the most important measures is just to discourage unnecessary, unessential travel and unnecessary movements in order just to keep the essential movements I've just been describing open. The Commission will come with a proposal how to deal with that, what the internal market is concerned, but also what our external borders are concerned. On Monday, in the relevant committee, this is the IPCR, in order to discuss with the member states how we can proceed on that matter in a coordinated manner. And indeed, there was a lot of support for the goal to have, by summer, vaccinated 70% of the adult population. If you look at the delivery schedules of the vaccines, this is doable. It's an enormous effort. I mean, this mass vaccination at a continental scale we've never done before. So we all know that we have to join forces. It is an enormous effort, but it is doable, and we are determined to reach this goal.
Thank you. Next question will be for Isabelle Horry, Europe 1. Isabelle, tu es avec nous.
Bonjour.
Bonsoir.
Bonjour, je voulais justement revenir sur cette question des frontières. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer un petit peu mieux ces histoires de seuil? Parce que vous parlez de zones. Est-ce que ça sera un pays? Est-ce que ce sera des régions? Et est-ce que ce sera déterminé pour passer de rouge clair à rouge foncé par la prédominance des nouveaux variants ou par le taux global de contamination? Et que pensez-vous? Vous avez dit de décourager fortement les voyages. le Premier ministre belge, lui, envisageait carrément d'interdire les voyages non essentiels. Est-ce que cette proposition a été rejetée ou est-ce qu'un pays pourrait décider de faire ça malgré tout? Merci.
Okay. In general, of course, it is member states' decision, but we've learned the lesson that it is good that we coordinate as much as we can. To give you an example, of course, the borders, the virus do not know and respect any kind of former borders. We do not have borders anymore, former borders within the European Union, the Schengen area. So you can have an area where there is on both sides, in two member states close to each other, the same epidemiological situation. But if in one half in this zone you do a strong lockdown and in the other half of this zone you keep shops open, you will have immediately movement of people to the other side to do shopping, for example, thus pushing forward the spread of the virus and the dissemination of the virus. So it is smart to look at homogeneous areas and there have targeted measures that the member states then can, in coordination, apply to make sure that we contain the spread of the virus as much as possible and, on the other hand, keep the flow in the single market as much as possible open.
Thank you. Next question will be for Thomas. Thomas Gutschker, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung.
Yes, thanks a lot. One question or two questions to the President of the Commission, please. Germany has specifically called for a testing requirement for cross-border workers. Has there been support for this idea, especially when it would be between dark red and red zones? How are you? And another question, please, for the President of the Council. You mentioned the support for the 70% vaccination goal. Has there also been support for the 80% goal, so 80% of people over 80 years by March? Thank you. Unanimous support from me.
Should I start?
Please.
Yeah. So the question you were raising, for example, is let's take a border close to or a country close to Luxembourg. You know that healthcare workers working in Luxembourg often live in one of the neighboring countries. And if that would be a dark red zone, within the zone, of course, any kind of movement is discouraged, but cross-border workers would have to go to work because they are essential healthcare workers. So this is not the problem, but it would be a problem if all of a sudden there would be a closure of border between Luxembourg and the neighboring country. That would not make any sense because they are the same epidemiological zone. If you look at different zones, then of course it is a decision of the member states together how to restrict travel, whether it requires testing or other measures. This is a decision that has to be taken now in the next days. We will debate it. There will be a proposal on it. The thought behind it is that we understand, once again, that we are one epidemiological zone and not divided in different member states where we have different situations. And we will only contain the virus if we have targeted measures and not unnecessary measures like blanket closure of borders, which would severely hurt our economy but not very much restrict the virus.
I have a next question from Tanya.
Excuse me. Un élément de réponse sur l'ambition qui a été exprimée par la Commission. Et la réunion ce soir, elle a permis de mettre en évidence, mais très très clairement, la totale mobilisation des 27 chefs d'État et de gouvernement qui sont complètement mobilisés sur deux fronts en même temps en réalité. D'une part, on doit réussir le processus d'accélération, d'implémentation des vaccins. On en a beaucoup parlé, il faut progresser par rapport à cela. Et en cela, les objectifs ambitieux, les 70% et les 80% fixés par la Commission sur le cadre dans lequel nous nous inscrivons, tout en disant ça va être difficile, c'est une épreuve extrêmement difficile, nous devons accélérer le processus et ça va dépendre aussi des capacités de distribution, des moments au cours desquels les prochains vaccins vont être agréés pour garantir qu'on ait les doses suffisantes afin de rencontrer l'objectif ambitieux, premier point. Mais dans le même temps où on mène ces batailles pour vacciner le plus largement possible, on doit être mobilisé pour continuer à limiter la propagation du virus, spécialement du nouveau variant du virus. Et ce sont ces deux batailles-là que l'on doit mener de front en parallèle tout au long des prochaines semaines. Et je peux vous dire que les 27 chefs d'État et de gouvernement, avec la Commission européenne, nous sommes complètement engagés, complètement mobilisés, parce que nous savons bien que si nous voulons retrouver une vie un peu plus normale, mais nous devons réussir à progresser sur ces deux fronts en même temps.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next question is for Tanya Milievska from MIA. Tanya?
Yes. Hi, just a sec. Hi, yes, it's Tanya Milievska from the Macedonian News Agency. I have a question on the Western Balkans. So you mentioned the sharing mechanism for vaccines and the COVAX. So can you give us some sort of deadline, of timeline, when the Western Balkans can expect some vaccines? North Macedonia has been buying now vaccines from Serbia, or at least receiving from Serbia. Serbia is buying them. So clearly the European Union is, for the moment, failing the Western Balkans. So can you explain when can the citizens in the Western Balkans expect some kind of help in terms of vaccines? Thank you.
So the answer is as soon as possible. We are going a double track. The one is, as you know, we have strongly supported from the very beginning COVAX, the COVAX facility that is built just for the purpose to provide vaccines to low and middle income countries. Europe is at the moment being the largest, gives the largest funds to the COVAX facility. But we obviously see that it is for COVAX too, at the moment, being difficult to acquire vaccines, and therefore we are establishing now in a second track also the mechanism in the European Union to get doses from the member states that then are being donated as Team Europe, for example, to our neighborhood in the Western Balkan.
I will take a last question from Rob Herbouts. Rob, you have the floor.
Yes, good evening. Wouldn't it be simpler to have just an outright ban on non-essential travel instead of in dark red zones and talking about strongly discouraging non-essential travel?
So it is.
Maybe one word. No, maybe one word about that. I repeat that we try to learn the lessons, and we think it's important to guarantee the functioning of the single market. Point one. On the other hand, we know that it will be probably necessary to take additional restrictive measures in order to limit the not essential travels, and this is the orientation that we are taking. And in the next hours, the next days, we will work again in order to coordinate, in order to cooperate, based on common sense, based on this idea that it's important to limit the spread of the virus. I've explained very clearly, I think, the reasons, point one, but at the same time, we think that it's important to avoid having or facing disruptions in the functioning of the single market.
I can only underline this. So the decision has to be taken, first of all, that we have this common approach with the different zones instead of thinking in member states categories. That is the first important step. Then to think about the mechanisms where we have learned that they're helping to limit the spread of the virus, and therefore discouraging strongly non-essential travel is one of the means. Testing requirements, for example, is another one. So these are two options of many in a basket that you can choose depending on what color the zone is you are looking at. This will be developed in detail in the next days. And again, it's last but not least a member state decision. but as they were asking strongly for common coordination, which is sensible in the situation we are in with the spread of the virus and the fact that we are looking at new variants in the European Union, it is a very good step forward that proactively now we are looking at this situation together as 27.
Thank you, Madam President and Mr. President. This concludes our press conference of tonight. See you soon. Thank you.